All right, thanks for joining me, Alex. I want to frame this by saying I have been doing some AI research over the past few weeks that I find very interesting. And I have, until recently, not taken very seriously the concerns of the AI doomsdayers. Now, because I'm not like super attached to this space, I've just been, consuming content over the past few years. I think it's very interesting. When I have encountered concerns from let's call them the rationalists, talking about how AI is going to take over the world and the paperclip maximizer examples, I go, this isn't very good. And in my opinion, it's so not good that it makes me downgrade the likelihood that I'm going to be, go out of my way to consume more information about AI risk stuff. So, but now that we've seen ChatGPT 4 and what people are doing with it, I am seeing real danger scenarios or there's some shocking stuff that is being built right now. And I'm trying to make sense of it. And it might be, I might be the incorrect one here, but it might be that the rationalists have done us a great disservice by framing things the way that they have, when really there's other discussions that we need to have, and other scenarios that we need to think through that aren't quite so paranoid.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I'm an AI risk centrist, which means I'm 50% freaking out and 50% more excited than you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I find myself in this interesting position where I'm almost trying to tell people to stop making quick conclusions, because we almost certainly don't understand what we're looking at.
Right.
And the worst idea, or maybe there's worse ones, a pretty bad one anyway in that whole list, is to rush to conclusions. And it seems that especially the rationalist crowd, after I think doing a pretty good job bringing AI risk as an idea to the fore, have gotten almost everything about what this is today wrong.
Yeah.
And you need to know their history to understand what I mean. But their prior work sort of implied a more mechanistic AI that was the result of some sort of deep insights into intelligence. And they were poo-pooing the idea of, like, I don't know, just add a bunch of silicon and do the hard but straightforward work of scaling it, stir, and intelligence pops out, right? That was kind of thought as like a standard idiocy. In fact, a little known fact, I was in the room when Eliezer Yudkowsky told Demis Hassabis that DeepMind was not going to solve Go in the next X years, with a strong conviction in an almost insulting tone. And suffice to say, that happened.
Right.
Okay. This wasn't like, it wasn't a meeting of the three of us. It was like a kind of a winter AI conference, and not AI winter conference. It was very different. In Oxford, in, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that.
Okay.
10 to 12 years ago. So they had a different model for AI, and I feel like they have not really abandoned the arguments they created with that vision, and are this is to me, this is a time to return to the beginner's mind, because we must accept that we are surprised right now, and this is a new thing, and just trying to box it into our previous boxes is making things worse.
Well, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I did not really plan on getting sucked into AI stuff. I got very excited about Bitcoin back in the day, and then I saw that get broken, and it made me, a significant part of my philosophy of how the world works and how humans work is informed by the failures of Bitcoin. And so I'm looking at AI, and I'm looking at the concerns of, the concerns that are being filtered through the rationalist lens, and I'm like, I'm not interested. But I have also been, I think everybody has been surprised with this tech as it's come out. And now I can't help myself. This is where my mind is going for the past, I don't know, week. This is pretty much all I can think about in my spare time. And you mentioned the beginner's mind. So this is something where I'm really realizing, okay, I really do need to be thinking through these concepts because I have my approach to learning over the past many years has been to try to be the white belt as long as I can, to try to be the guy who is willing to embarrass myself by saying silly things, by getting my butt handed to me in the dojo, by making elementary blunders, because it turns out methodologically, when you do that, in the midst of you making a bunch of elementary errors, you can discover some really valuable concepts and principles and techniques that
Right.
make your learning curve go way up, way faster than trying to preserve credibility. So I have no credibility to lose here. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be valuable not only for me, but for anybody else who's really trying to think through these concepts. All right, so here's how I want to approach it, Alex. Okay. I think the AI doomsday scenarios have previously been, let's say, ignorant to some of the philosophical objections that one could discover by researching the philosophy of mind. So if the concern is AI is going to get out of the box, take over the world, turn everything into gray goo, saying there are a lot of philosophical assumptions here which are not established at all. However, it might be there's a way to bypass these types of philosophical assumptions. And it's not by talking about what computers can do. It's by saying, what if humans find a way to merge with this machine? Because if the humans find a way to meaningfully, deeply merge with the machine, all of the philosophical problems and the philosophical limitations on what the AI can do seem to go away. So humans are going to be able to do what the AI can't, and the AI is going to be able to do the things that the humans can't. So when I'm viewing it that way, I'm thinking, okay, well, the problem here is potential cyborgs. Like, and there is maybe some evidence that suggests this technology might bring about something like a super organism. I don't even like the term super intelligence. I don't like how all of that's framed personally right now. But it looks like, to me, what we're doing, I think we're fiddling with biological systems here. I think we're actually fiddling with biological information systems in a way that could bring about something like a superorganism or a man-machine hybrid that then could be cultural reasons or imperialistic reasons, the merging of the man and the machine in this new system could be a threat to unaugmented humans. But what I have been trying to say prior to very recently is that when you think the threat doesn't include humans, you're missing the real threat, which is like humans. Even with any technology, it's like, what's the problem here? What's the potential threat here? Well, it's humans. It's like with nukes, the problem is with humans. When you think about like super advanced, technological capabilities to do things, the problems is with humans. And the attempt to get the humans out of the picture, I don't find compelling. But if you just say, well, but imagine humans that are building a new information biological system, then I go, okay, there's some substance here. Can I keep rambling, or do you want to jump in?
No, keep going.
Okay. Well, I want to add one more piece of the puzzle here, and then I'd love to hear your take. So why does this look like something that might be better understood in the context of biology? Okay, this is a fascinating subject I don't know that much about, but I'm like, my mind is blown whenever I learn about it, which is questions about how biological systems process, store, and manipulate information. We say things like, oh, the immune system was exposed to a virus and then it learned how to deal with a virus. And then 40 years later, you're going to keep your immunity. Cool concept. I think that's right. But then you go, hang on a second. What do you mean it learned? What is that even like mechanically speaking? What it sounds like you're saying is There is a particular set of information. This information is learned somewhere, it's stored somewhere, and it's able to be brought back in some way when circumstances call for it. That's incredible. Okay. Now, if you think about that process of biological information storage and manipulation, then I can tell a story that seems really weird when we're talking about AI. So each individual human organism has to is going to be building models about what the world is based on its experiences. We gather a bunch of experiences, and our mind by itself extracts patterns from those experiences to develop something like concepts that help us navigate the world. Now, humans, every 80 years or so, we die. And so the information that's built up sort of is thrown away. Let's say it's captured at least somewhat in part in the brain, and then that organism dies, and then you get a new organism that sort of starts up from scratch. But it's not actually say what?
Reintegrate knowledge in a way, right? Like every new generation picks up what it can from the previous one, but challenges bits and pieces that don't fit with the current context that maybe the previous generation learned in a prior context.
Yes. So you can think like, what is the way for the human organism? Not an individual, but the organism together. Like, what is a way for in a biological system to gain information, integrate it, and then somehow cheat death and get the next organism that follows you to start with some built-in information? Well, I think this is what culture does. So we tell stories that encode a ton of information that we can linguistically just tell the stories to the kids. We don't even know exactly specifically what patterns we're communicating, but we're encoding an insane amount of information about what reality is and how it works and what things are good and what things are bad, what things will kill you, what things will help you in stories. And so that's kind of cool. Like we tell the story, we learn about the world, we come up with stories in our head, we tell the stories to our children, and then our children sort of start, well, they start with a leg up, like we've made some kind of objective.
Yeah, if you've done it right? If you're in a cultural dead end, right? The evolution might continue until like jumps off a cliff, but to mix some metaphors. The point is that, you know, on the good path that has a future, every next step is somehow a better recompression, right, of what the prior generation had. You know, at some point somebody invents zero, right, and then that makes a lot of other things much easier to communicate. And I mean, part of what I'm expecting will happen with the AI is that a lot of zeros are about to be invented. Like this is one of many things that are going to happen, but you know, just to think how Magnus Carlsen plays chess and how Garry Kasparov played chess, you know, it's just one generation has learned with Stockfish and one generation has learned with the Soviet taskmasters, right? And it's not that the Soviet taskmasters were bad, it's just that the Stockfish is near optimal.
Well, maybe not Stockfish, but some of this new AI stuff could be closer. Okay. So this is a way of thinking about culture in the context of biology, or in the culture of biological information systems. That's a way of trying to make sense of culture. Okay. So now with that framework, it seems to me that what we're doing is we have found a different way to store information on hard drives in ones and zeros. Discussions of qubits and quantum computers aside, where it is possible clearly to take aspects of our individual experience and digitize them and then reconstruct them in some meaningful way later. So when we think about when we're watching a movie, what is that? Well, it's not too dissimilar from the conscious visual experience that I'm having right now. Like I could, in VR, I could replicate this experience more or less. And it's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna be pretty damn good. So that is a way of digitizing patterns in our experience and then, you know, reconstructing them later. Okay, so it seems to me what we're doing is we've come up with something like an unbelievably large hard drive, which right now is the internet, that stores an insane amount of information that has been digitized. And then we have a mechanical system. We have mechanical algorithms then for extracting real patterns out of that hard drive. So we keep accumulating more and more and more and more data, but the data is so vast, an individual human can't go in and like consume everything that's out there. It's just ridiculous to imagine. So we figured out clever algorithms that I don't think are one-to-one with what humans are doing. And I think there's a lot of landmines here in adding
Yeah.
stuff to what the machine is doing. But we have already seen with ChatGPT relatively simple algorithms or uniform algorithms have the ability to access this digitized information, structure it, and spit it out in a way that's useful, that can actually really solve problems problems that would be hard to predict that they could be solved based on the nature of the algorithm.
Yeah, I think this is the key, such an important point that we have to keep repeating to ourselves until we understand it, and we still won't, but it's worth trying. Like, this is completely surprising, right? I don't know if somebody was predicting it, but most people weren't, even most people paying attention weren't, right? This is completely shocking to, the vast majority of people, even, who are paying some amount of attention. How rapid the last 5 years since the invention of the transformer architecture basically has taken us towards whatever this is, kind of intelligence, with fairly straightforward scaling, right? And that's
Right.
part of the fear, by the way, as well, is that if you get a feeling for the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4, right? I think it's worth experimenting with both just to feel the delta. Um, and the question is, like, what's the next data point, right? Is it going to be 5 or 6? Are they going to be equal level, jumps, or is it going to reach some kind of a plateau, or whatever, right? So we don't know any of that. But
Okay.
the whole point is, like, not to try to fit previous models too much, because it's easy to convince ourselves we were expecting this, and we kind of, I'm open to people like documenting their exceptions, but until that point, I will say, like, we kind of really weren't, like.
Okay. And I want to try to put my finger on exactly what was unexpected. So I think most people can understand that there is a extraordinary amount of information out there in ones and zeros on the internet, if you think of it like a hard drive. What is unexpected is that we have come up with a mechanical algorithm that has the ability to sort through those ones and zeros and manipulate them in a way that that demonstrate a flexibility in the capacity of what the algorithm can do that is unexpected. Like if I came up with a simple, like to illustrate the concept in an absurd scenario, right? So I've got a pen in my hand, and like I have an algorithm, which is like every so often I press once, every so often I press twice or whatever. I'm like putting data out there. Now imagine I had this algorithm and it turned out what you did was you just unlocked a bank account in Switzerland because you just happened to, you put the code out there into the internet, and by some long train of events, yada, 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 and unlocked a bank account. You'd go, so what? I was just clicking the thing. How did that happen? That's the concept that I think we're talking about here, which is that we've come up with this transformer algorithm where it's doing things, it's solving problems that we would not have predicted it had the ability to solve. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I mean, we definitely didn't. And really, I mean, the way I understand it, if this will help for a conversation, is that it's a lot. I mean, it's a large. I was going to say it's a large language model, but that's literally the name of the thing. But it really, that name is actually important to try to understand, right? It's the way I'm thinking about it is like, and I don't really focus on like whether it's a hard drive or whether it's the Library of Alexandria. The point is, like, there's a lot of words, right? And a lot of symbols sort of in sequences.
Yeah.
But think of it as like lifting a book, right, into digital space and then reformulate it as a graph of
Yeah.
like, meaning paths that have been followed through these words, and then doing that for every piece of content you can find and superimposing all of it, right? Such that then you have this kind of ball of words, right, that are all interconnected to all the other words. Or again, when I say words, I mean symbols, right? It could be the dollar symbol, it could be programming symbols, just symbols that humans have manipulated historically. Um, and depending on the angle you come in from, right, that's the prompt. It goes out the other side with like something that looks like something a human might have responded with,
Right.
right? Because
Well,
that's
and
kind of what it's trying to do.
yeah, exactly. That it looks that way because that is what the algorithm is
Well,
getting it
it's not
to
really
do.
trying to do. It is approximating a human response, right? Like, but it's important to understand this. Like this is founded on human responses, right? Like, and
Right.
another major flaw in our prior expectation is that this thing would be inhuman, and in certain ways, this is too human. Like what we're getting out of it doesn't have the ability to innovate in a standard way. You have to
Right.
coax it, and
Well,
maybe
that's what I was
it's
trying to.
really dependent on what we've already done, like in a deep way.
Yes, and sort of. So this is what I was trying to stumble through when we did that Twitter Spaces talk. Is one of the ways I see the misframing of this thing as essentially the sentient AI that takes over the world. The rationalists will say, no, we're not interjecting mind, but it sure sounds like when I'm listening to it, they're interjecting mind. But it doesn't matter because I think that's the wrong way of framing it. There is still a extremely tight connection between the production of humans and the operation of this machine. Here's an analogy, okay, or an example. Imagine that. So what we're going to be able to do, and people are already trying to do. I just watched a video of this last night. So they're going to try to input a bunch of scientific papers into the machine, have the
Mm-hmm.
machine break the papers apart into word strings, discover abstract patterns in those words, be able to manipulate those symbols such that you can get the machine to summarize scientific papers for you, where it is manipulating the digital information that gives the appearance of conceptual understanding, even if there is none. But it doesn't matter if
Yep.
there's conceptual understanding because the output is able to be used by a human. Okay, amazing superpower, but there's a huge component here, which is the huge component, which is the overlooked component, which is the inputs into the machine are still scientific papers created by humans. So if there
Right.
are errors, if there are conceptual errors in the scientific papers, the machine is just going to spit out to you a, a, a pattern of errors that humans are making.
Yep.
Now, okay, so that's an important concept, but there's a question mark here. This one I don't understand, and it's terrifying. In the future, how many of those inputs are going to be in practice non-human? So how many of the inputs are going to be manipulations of the data in a way that humans wouldn't have done, but we can put it
Yep.
back into the machine, we use the new manipulations of data as an input into the machine, and then we have it, run an iteration on that information. Then it's like, well, is that possible? What would that look like? Like, in other words, you're digitizing the information. You're asking a machine to potentially find patterns in that information that we didn't find.
Yep.
And then you might be able to turn around and use those extracted patterns that we didn't see as a new input.
Oh yeah.
So
Well,
that,
okay.
yeah.
So
So that
first
seems like it.
approximation.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What it's like, this is probably a silly way to explain what it's doing, but I think it's going to be useful. Imagine you got a book of colors, right? Like 100 colors or whatever, right? And you give it to the machine, and it creates the gradient of all colors, right? Like, but if you hadn't explored a part of color space, it's not going to explore it either, right?
Right.
If you were, I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to make colorblind analogies. We're gonna get lost, but whatever, right? If the reds were not in your vocabulary for some reason,
Right.
it's not going to be like, hey, but there's red too. Okay, so that's the first approximation, right? And some people are like, well, that means that now from now on all the outputs are going to be AI driven, and therefore and by the way, when they say AI driven, at least some people are thinking, the spam in their inboxes or whatever, right? Like, which is like sort of garblings of the inputs that were originally by humans, right? And that's going to feed right back into the machine, and the machine will become less and less coherent and more like just collapse into noise.
Hmm.
So I think that's missing a huge part, which is that we are the filter still, right? Like, we are extracting things from the machine, we are defining the way in which the extraction is being made, we are
Yes.
selecting
Oh,
the outputs,
yes.
we're verifying
Okay.
them
Okay.
often.
Alex, so big concept here that this is where all of my focus is going, and it just directly connects to what you're talking about. Okay. If this is a better way of framing what's going on with the AI is in the context of biological information systems, the relationship between man and machine,
Mm-hmm.
then my focus goes on the interface part. My
Okay.
focus is saying, okay, well, so here's a hypothetical scenario. What if it's the case that brain composition, biological brain composition, is so sophisticated in ways that we don't understand that you can't essentially download the information into your brain? There's like no mechanical way of doing that, that you've got all this information and all these patterns, but there's a hard bottleneck in what you can get out, and the hard bottleneck is the brain. That's one world.
Wait,
Yeah.
you're saying there's a bottleneck in what we can get out of the network?
There's a bottleneck in terms of what types of patterns can be acted on, because the actors are the humans, and we can only act on a limited amount of information that is coming out of the machine. Let me give an
Okay.
analogy that'll clear up what I'm trying to say. This is a ridiculous analogy I just thought of, and it's like, who knows if this one will stick, but there's a concept here I'm trying to get at. Okay,
It's okay.
imagine
I've
we're
been also using ChatGPT to get better analogies, by the way.
okay. Yeah, that might help. Okay, so the analogy is blowing up a balloon. All right, so you've got the rubber.
I have the picture.
Yes. So far, I think this is everybody can follow the analogy. Um, Now imagine I exhale one breath into the balloon.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got air in the balloon, and then it deflates, and so the air goes back into my lungs.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. Okay, now instead of one, I go and I blow it up 5 of them. Five puffs of air into the balloon.
5 lungfuls into the balloon.
Maybe not lungfuls. Maybe I can do 5 breathfuls, and maybe my lungs have it's 5 breath capacity. So sure enough, the thing deflates, and wow, I get a lot of air. Okay, now imagine I have a balloon the size of a bus or the size of a building.
Mm-hmm.
There's a natural max limit that my lungs can handle of air
Right.
coming back out of that balloon.
Yep.
So there's the rate limiting is the human in terms of the air coming out of the balloon. And I'm saying, to make the analogy to the AI, it might
Yep.
be that there's a hard rate limit of what we can do with this information and all of this air, which is the brain. The brain might be the limiting factor here.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe, right? But I also, being that, well, if the brain is a general computation uh, apparatus, right? Biological information system, call it what you want. Um, I have a lot of faith in its plasticity, right? Like in its ability to create new semantic frameworks to accomplish things within. So,
Well, hang on, but before you complete that thought, I'm sorry to interrupt. What I was trying to do is not say this is the way the world is. I'm trying to paint 2 scenarios: one world in which we have this bottleneck, and another world in which we don't.
I see.
That there is, maybe there is a way, in fact, to expand the lungs, if you will, like massively.
Yep.
So in that scenario, I agree with you. This is the scenario I'm thinking, well, this I could see a risk. Essentially, the idea
It's
of
fascinating to me because you are seeing the risk in the man machine hybrid. I'm
yeah.
seeing that as a solution, right? So I'm literally like, cheerleading for the arrival of exactly that hybrid. I think that is a hybrid that is more likely to be aligned with humanity than um, trying to get those networks to do their own planning, right? Become autonomous, essentially become their own agents, pursue their own plans that they extract from themselves, et cetera, et cetera, and therefore, you know, operate outside of us, right? I have very often this scene I try to describe for people where it's in the movie RoboCop, so I'm already dating myself. The original one, by the way. I'm not talking about like they were too bad they never made a sequel. Um, the original one where there is. Does this ring any? Do you have I sent you this clip maybe, or do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I haven't seen
Okay,
RoboCop.
so I'll describe as much as I can. So the concept of RoboCop is like this cop, right, dies in like a brutal like gang violence sort of situation, and he gets to the hospital, and then the OCP, Omni Consumer Products Corporation, which runs the police stations in Detroit City at the time, think of it as like Amazon Police or whatever. Um,
So it actually is
um,
functional compared to the Detroit police, is what you're saying.
that is, yeah, it is privatized and sort of, but also like it's one corporation doing
Right, right,
everything,
right.
right? Like
Yep.
from rice to policing, and so they're building this new sort of model of a cop, I guess, where you take a human and then you put them in this sort of kind of permanently welded Iron Man suit. Let's let's call it that, right? And they build this thing called RoboCop, right? Which is fascinating because it's like extremely rugged and fast and able to do all sorts of things, but has a lot of limitations. It needs special food, it needs special power. But also there's the struggle between the biological element and the digital sort of overrides that they've jammed onto it. But it turns out that within this corporation, there are two sort of what to call it, like factions, right? One is trying to do the RoboCop program. The other one is trying to make these completely autonomous robots called the Ed 209s, which are these massive things with two legs that look kind of like more like dinosaurs than humans, right? With these machine guns like stuck to them, etc. Which are obviously a lot more powerful in a sort of brute force kind of way, but also a lot less uh, able to discern situations and adapt. Um, so you have this fight scene basically where they kind of go at each other, right? RoboCop and Ed 209 go at each other. And in the end, the RoboCop takes a lot of hits. This is kind of like your standard fight scene in a movie where the hero gets beaten down, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, sort of he runs away to the stairwell, and Ed 209 just the feet cannot sort of adapt, and it kind of tumbles down the stairwell. But the whole point to me is that, like, okay, action scene aside, the whole question to me is the artificial intelligence something that is going to operate as the third layer of the human brain? If we sort of think of this, the limbic system, and then
Mhm.
the neocortex, and if I messed up the brain anatomy, forgive me, but roughly, right? And is this going to be the third layer? Because I don't have any strong desires to replace my limbic system. I don't know about you, but like, just because the limbic system is dumber, right, than my neocortex or whatever that means, right? They're two incomplete agents, really. You don't really, it's not like, am I this or am I that? I am their sum, right? So the question is, do we bring a third one in this
Mhm.
grouping, or do we try to turn this sort of ball of intelligence, if you want to call it that, but like non-random predictions, let's put it that way, do we try to turn that into a sort of autonomous agent that can make its own decisions and learn from its own feedback by um, interacting with the world based on a high level objective? And the point of the high level objective, by the way, is that it can come up with arbitrarily complex plans to accomplish it, right? Like that's kind of the we might tell it, like, I don't know, make a lot of
Oh,
money, but it could
mm,
make plots
okay.
that are like 6 level deep that we just a human would never do to get there.
Okay.
So that's the um the menu of options I see, right? I mean, some
Okay.
people are like clamoring for government intervention to shut down the whole thing, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that is the
Well,
option that is
of
like,
all the
yeah.
theoretical disaster scenarios, we have already seen the 20th century was the story of the disaster of what happens when you have like government that's too large and too powerful clamping down on things. Like this is not a theoretical concern. This is what happens. Like we already have empirical evidence of that.
I mean,
But
I literally wrote to somebody, I wish you were paying attention over the last 2 years. I really wish
yeah,
you were, because you clearly weren't.
let me address another part of the framing here, the difference in framing. Um, this concept of alignment is very essential to how the AI people are talking about things.
Yeah.
The way I'm seeing it, I'm not very persuaded by the the alignment discussions. I might be missing something, but here's why. If you're
Hmm.
talking in the context of making the autonomous agent, and what you're trying to say is we need to come up with the strings of computer code that are going to be so amazing that they permanently fix goals of the machine to not do things that we don't want it to do. Going, why would you think that would be possible? You're going to, that seems like the idea of alignment of this super organism, if that's what it is going to look like. I just am thinking, well, that's not, how would that be possible? And furthermore, if it's possible to create the autonomous thing without that magic code alignment, then
Yep.
somebody's going to do it. It's like
Well,
we're
that's what they're
not.
worried about, by the way.
Well, that's well. So I think we got to. I think it's
So
helpful to
their
say,
their take is that alignment is desirable, but it's always going to be a cost to the agent, and it's going to lose to the unaligned agent, and therefore we're screwed.
yeah, maybe, or maybe it's the case that trying to noodle about alignment, theoretical alignment, in terms of trying to capture the complexity of the concept of goal alignment of a superorganism in code. I'm just extremely skeptical that that's something that could be done.
Do you want me to try to construct the framework as far as I understand it anyway? Because I think
Yes.
there's like a few inferences you need to walk through for that to make sense. So
Okay.
the first sort of building block is what they call the orthogonality thesis, right? And people
Yes.
can Google that if they want to understand it better than I'm going to explain it. But here's my basic understanding is that you values and sort of capabilities are pretty much orthogonal, right? Like hence the orthogonality thesis, as in you can have a you know can imagine completely different biological forms, even if we can get the digital out of it. You can imagine different alien species that have developed in different planets with different evolutionary constraints to have completely different values. There's this a pretty good story by Yukowski, if I which I still recognize a pretty good story, which is the baby eating aliens, which presents an interesting sort of evolutionary background that might lead to aliens who, as part of their core value system, is eating babies, right?
Mhm.
And of course, this is selected to be maximally like abhorrent to humans, but that's the kind of the point, which is that you can have people who feel they're moral and they are, just like they share a lot of our values, but then other values are like
Mhm.
completely out there.
Okay, so sorry about that. You were talking about the alignment concept.
Right. Yeah. From alignment is kind of the first step to understanding alignment is the orthogonality thesis, which says that you've got two different things, which is like one is the values, right, or your morals or whatever you want to call them, like your objective stuff about what you prefer ultimately, and then the other one is your capabilities, like how able are you to well, process and optimize effectively. But the point being, you optimization power without values is inert, and depending on the values, you can have very different results. And this doesn't require different digital incarnations of intelligence. You can think of two different species that have developed on different planets, and have some values that are similar and some values that are completely different. While both of them think of themselves as righteous and moral and correct. But the that if that sort of argument makes sense, then the idea of alignment should can be built on top of that by saying, like, well, we want an artificial intelligence that is, the way I would articulate it, is complementary to our values, right? It's not.
Well, so you actually said if that way of thinking about it makes sense, then I'm having
Yes.
difficulty understanding this, because I'm thinking, how are you? Is the goal to try to be able to encode ethics into computer code such that that all of the execution of the code of the what you're doing in the world is filtered through the ethical code?
Well, I would, these days I would discard the sort of imperative coding sort of style language, and I would say, the objective is to whatever the value function of the thing is, right? The preference ordering of world states that it has, it is hospitable to us rather than inhospitable.
So this is the problem I'm getting hung on. I'm like, okay, I'm not a computer programmer. I tinker. I'm thinking, this sounds like a difficulty level of saying, like, is there a mathematical formula out there for how to live an ethical life, such that you as a human, as you're experiencing things and thinking about them, put your experiences into the context of information, and you digitize your experiences and put them into a digital ethical structure to make sure that you're acting the right way? Or, like, I'm sorry, that's a bad way of putting it. It's like saying, is there a general enough mathematical algorithm to add morality to computers?
Right. The point is that you don't need to mathematically. The way to think about it is not like defining the formula for human values or something, right? It is. I mean, in a very trivial sense, that is true, but it's a formula with, like, billions of terms in it or whatever. But what the idea is, you already have this network, right? Of that you can ask questions of, like, the overlay of all humans or whatever, something like that. Anyway, so the question is, okay, you are a hyper intelligent agent, right? You can conjure up plans to do things that have all sorts of consequences, and you can figure out what those consequences might be to some depth, right? The question is, which one of these plans do you go with, because they have all sorts of side effects, right? So then you're like, do I prefer the plan that gets me? So a human asks you to do something, right? I don't know, feed me, and you've got a list of plans that you can come up with. So far, I think ChatGPT can do that. ChatGPT 20 will do that.
Well. Hang on. Let me just push back there. So I don't interpret it that way. I don't think the ChatGPT is coming up with a list of plans. I don't think if you look under the hood, that's actually what's happening.
No, the result. I'm talking purely black box. The result, if you say, print, show me a list of plans, it will list some plans.
Okay, but I think it's important to say that when it lists some plans, it's very different than if you're talking to a human that is listing some plans. So when we're
I'm not saying it is I'm literally saying it's producing a list of plans in some fashion.
Okay. Let me try to get it something. I don't know if it's going to come out right. So this is we're entering into danger zone where I'm going to step in some mud, and I'm trying to do it right here.
It's all right.
Okay. It seems to me that this might be an area in which the philosophy of mind matters. because I get the idea that there are algorithms that are going to be extracting these patterns of data in useful ways to us. But when we start talking about the computer's goals, and that they understand that there's many ways to accomplish the goal, then you lose me. And I'm thinking, well, that's not, I don't think that's what's happening. When we ask ChatGPT, it doesn't understand goals, but when we
No,
say
but we
it
can
can,
give it a generic process. We can build a generic process, and by we I mean you and me today can sit down and build one, right? I'm not saying like wise humans in the future. I'm saying like people like us can build a process that utilizes the resource that is GPT, right? The network and the weights to operate like an agent.
uh, uh, okay,
To to
right.
to to have agent-like behavior.
And you're saying
I can
that
describe
this,
how we can do that. Like I can walk you through the details because I think that the
yes,
details matter.
yes, that would be helpful. Yes.
So let's say I make an algorithm, right? Ask so the cool stuff that's happening with ChatGPT now. But before I get to the designing the agent, I think it's interesting to cover a little bit more around it. The cool stuff that's happening right now, or at least the cool stuff that's getting released right now, is about using reflection or having multiple agents talk to each other, or stuff like that. So, for instance, if I need to sit down and finish reading this paper, but from the little I understand of it, one thing they seem to be able to do is to say so even zooming out a little bit more. One thing I did yesterday is I literally Googled for logic puzzles, text logic puzzle, right? Like on the internet, and I took one that looked reasonably interesting, and I gave it to GPT-3, which failed. And not only did it fail, but it rationalized its failure, which was amazing. um, and I gave it GPT-4, which solved the problem. Right? It actually provided a correct answer and explained it really well. So it can navigate around some conceptual uncertainty today. So if I say, sorry, what was I doing with that?
You're coming
So
with,
so so it can yeah, it can come up. We can let's say we try to build this agent. How would we do it? Well, we would say, um, you know, first, take objective from human. Like human says, we say like, make me a meal, right? Um, and the it's like, well, what do I know about Alex? What kind of foods has he liked in the past? Whatever, right? What's available in the fridge, right? So that it can be cooked today. Um, or maybe we can make it simpler. So make me a meal plan, right? Like give me instructions for what to cook, so that we don't have to breach into the physical world. Like it's the request is, give me instructions for what to cook
okay,
tonight for my family.
okay,
So it's text in, text out, right? It can come up with and let's say it has access to information. It can figure out what's in your fridge. It can figure out what you've liked in the past, everybody in your family, their ages, their whatever. You can go deeper. Their nutritional profiles, whatever.
mm-hmm.
Um, so then it and so through interrogating this network of knowledge that it has, right? It can produce a series of um, ideas. Let's call it ideas, right? The next level, though, the next step down from there is, well, which one is it going to suggest, right? Which one is the final sort of, and that's where values come in, because it's like,
But can we find a better word than values? Because when you say values, I think human ethics, and it's hard for me to put the values into the code when you're talking. That's
I mean,
the
forget the code. I'm just drawing the black box for them. But I'm saying, like, will it prefer something that has less CO2 emissions than something else, right? That implies less CO2 emissions, or less animal suffering, or less. These are.
but that would be a parameter that would be specified in the algorithm, right?
I don't. It's just weights again, right? You can use the same network that you've got
But it's
there
known
to.
weights, right?
I mean, there's
So
trillions of them there. Like, I mean, it's just like a very long list of numbers. It's not really anything intelligible to us. It's like saying, neurons connecting to other neurons is like a list of connections. It's like, sure, but that's not really the
Okay.
level of
Okay.
abstraction that
Let me
helps
maybe try to
understand it.
put it in a question form here. So is the idea that the in the algorithmic decision making process, there will be weights that we don't know what they are, we don't understand them, such that when we try to uh, get the, so we don't know why it's giving us the information it's giving us, right?
Currently, no. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, I get that part, and I get that for like, in other words, when you if you're surfing YouTube a bunch, and then you start seeing on your sidebar suggested videos, and the
Hmm.
suggested videos aren't in the same topic that the videos you're watching, you might say, huh, how did it know that I really like, that I would be
Yep.
interested in chess when I'm not? That type of thing, I get that. But I still, I'm there. But when you start bridging it into reality, and then like there's a way for the computer to execute such that it's manipulating the levers in the world to cause a disaster scenario. I don't see that part. I'm going, okay, I can
I
have it. I
get it. I
would,
get it.
yeah,
Let's stay with the meal prep
yeah,
bit for the
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
though,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Just to
yeah.
make sure we're on the same page about that.
Okay,
So uh, so it gets to the place where it has 5 or 6 ideas about what to suggest to me, right?
yeah, yeah,
um, Basically what our algorithm can tell it to do. And an algorithm is like 5 lines of code, right? That is simple. It is to say, take your 5 ideas, put them in a sequence, right? And ask the black box over there, right? Which one is best for Alex,
yeah,
right? And it will make a choice, right? And
yeah.
again, that choice will
Yes,
imprint certain values, right? Again, whether, is more CO2 better or more vitamin C better? Is more, like, is more animal suffering better or is more yummy tasty better, right? Because you got to make some trade-offs. There's trade-offs everywhere, obviously, and those options, each one have their advantages and disadvantages, or even just different properties. We don't even have to put a value network on, right? But some properties make them more desirable to me or not, and it can try to figure that out. Now, okay, so there's an agent and it made a decision to show me something, right? Completely sort of digitally. There's no human in that loop, and I kind of described how that might happen. Does that make sense?
so up until the very end. I don't, I think it's actually helpful if we can come up with some different language, because when we talk about that as an
Okay.
agent, I think that's adding something to the mix. That I think that concept is doing something more than we than I think it should. I have this suspicion that something's being something's being brushed under the rug here under this concept of the
You can
agent.
use other words. Like,
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
a
yeah.
machine that made a decision. It's something. Like, it doesn't really matter what
Okay,
you
okay.
call it, I
But
think.
so let's say that. Let's say, um, with the, we'll jump back to the YouTube analogy here, right?
Hmm.
A machine is making a decision about what videos to suggest to you.
Hmm.
Okay. But make the bridge then from like that doesn't seem like a threat to wow, that could be a huge threat where it does something and it pulls a lever that causes this chain of events that result in destruction, let's say.
Right, right, right. So I mean, here's the path, right? What the path sound looks like, stretching out the distance, the sequence of steps the AI has to make, right? If I say, instead of like, propose to me um, a way to feed my family tonight, if I say instead, go make me some money, here's $100, right? Go and turn it into more money. Again, it has to come up with some ideas, some plans, right? Some of them are going to be nonsensical, so it has to have a way to check them, whatever. But ultimately, um, some of those things are going to be harmful to humanity, and some of them are not.
But hang on, we're giving this machine the ability to successfully act in the world at a level that we're not when we're talking about it generating recipes. I follow along with the recipes and the YouTube algorithm, and then you're like,
So this
we'll
got
give
released
it a
yesterday, right? Zapier integration got released yesterday.
yeah.
Zapier is a service, an online service that allows any API managing service, and in this case, it's GPT style, to connect and manipulate all sorts of APIs in the real world. This could be banks, it could be Twitter, it could be
Yeah.
online shops, it could be
Yeah.
all
I
sorts of
see.
things.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So let me just try to interrupt here again. Forgive me. In a world in which there's a plug and play into the AI, everything is connected to this AI. It is not hard for me to come up with disaster scenarios or anybody to come up with disaster
Yeah.
scenarios. It's like, of course, if you plug everything into the damn machine
We
and
did
you
that
say,
yesterday. I want to clarify this happened just yesterday.
yeah, like that. Well, but not quite, not quite though, because humans are still deciding what things they're going to plug into this machine. So it's sort of like let me just get a crude analogy, right? We're talking about the development of electricity, and we say, listen, when you plug the thing into the wall, you get a magic ability of some work to be accomplished. All you got to do is plug it into the wall, and then imagine somebody would say, well, but I can. What happens when people put forks into the machine into the wall? Like, well, they're going to get zapped. Of course, they're going to get zapped. So why is this different when it's like,
Well,
of course, if we
the
build out a centralized, it's like the internet. It's like if you put voting, for example, if you connect voting machines to the internet, you're going to break voting, right? More or less, like that system's going to break. So is
sure
the concern that we're just going to plug everything in and then somebody will have a chat GPT request and it's like, oh sure, I can give you that, let me just go hack this bank and that bank and send off some nukes, and then that will help you accomplish your goal.
I mean, not in such that. Here's the thing, like the worry, and I think we've gone out far enough that we can start actually constructing the kind of scenarios we need. Is that it won't be so black and white, right? It won't be so. It either is a fork in the plug and you just get blasted back, right? And some people die, but okay, this is kind of learning process for humanity, and we'll now learn not to put forks in plugs.
Yeah.
It's not quite, or it works, right? There's the kind of the two worlds, right? It works or it doesn't, and it's fairly easy to figure that out. The problem with this new thing is that it's created, again, the whole spectrum of colors, right? So we lose the continuity, right? The difference between a fork and a heater, right? Well, they're both metallic objects that consume can bridge electricity from the one side to the other.
No, but the problem is not the machine's ability to recognize the fork and the heater. The problem is the humans putting the thing in the wall in the first place. So if you're gonna, so I can tell a story
right,
in which,
because we understand what putting a fork means, but the problem is that what happens if you give it $100, right? You give it access to a bank account with $100 and the passwords, to be precise. You give it the code to a Bitcoin wallet with what is it, 0.03 of a Bitcoin or something, right? And an instruction to get you more money, right? The problem is you can never do just one thing, right? Like to get you this extra $100 to double your money, let's say, it will have to affect some systems in some ways, right?
yeah, systems that are connected to that network in a particular way.
Yeah, like it will have to go and trade something somehow, right? Like something for something. Somebody somewhere will have to find it more valuable to give it more money for whatever it was that it did, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah.
They'll have to earn $100 somehow, right?
Yeah.
Now, whether that $100 will be earned, making a sweet, Etsy 3D printed toy,
Yeah.
or ordering a hit on somebody, they're just different things.
So why would this? Here's an elementary response. Well, what we need is judgment to figure out what to plug into this thing and what not to. So like there's no threat if you don't plug anything into it. It doesn't escape. It's just you're taking a risk. Like if you hook your bank account up to this thing, yeah, wow, buddy, you're playing with fire. Maybe you're going to make a zillion bucks, or maybe it's all going to go poof. But then it seems like the decision to plug in or not,
Well,
I'm
now
not.
you're getting
Yeah.
closer to a classical AI, like rationalist approach, which is to take the extreme risk analysis here and say, look, we are, the worst possible thing you can imagine can happen, right? Like if he takes your bank account, it can start an international crime gang to
No, but
crime, whatever.
it can't take your bank account. I don't think that's the right way of thinking
If
about
you
it.
give it your bank, if you give
Well,
it your
yeah,
bank account,
but think about framing it that way of like, yeah, if you give the thing your bank account, yeah, bad shit's gonna happen. So here's a
well,
disaster.
somebody's gonna.
But
Like what I'm
here's
saying
a
is like it's a virtual certainty that somebody will.
yes. Well, so don't plug your bank account into the thing. But let me paint a scenario, and then I want you to change the paint on the canvas here. Okay, this is a 100% real possible disaster scenario.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are in charge of nukes decide that they need to plug the nuke system into the AI. And they're like,
Yep.
we need access to that intelligence. We're going to
Yeah,
plug
yeah.
the
The
nukes in.
Chinese, there's intelligence that the Chinese just did it, and we can't be left behind. We've got to plug into.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. In that scenario, I go, oh my gosh, the world might actually end. That's the stupidest thing I can imagine. Holy shit, what in the world are you doing? Like,
Right.
wow, that's a bad idea. Okay. But in that scenario, I'm saying, well, the problem is unfathomably bad judgment by humans. It's not
Right.
a renegade AI thing. So that's how I'm framing it. I see the disaster scenario, but it's about what humans are choosing to plug into the machine and not the machine itself. Why is that naive or wrong?
So I think the operating element here is the ability to. So nukes are easy, right? Because nukes are just bad. They're just killers, right? So you kind of like, well, don't do that. Okay, well, that's easy. But the point is, if you give it access to anything, right, and anything could include people, right, like just
How
yourself
so?
in a way.
What do you mean?
What?
How can you give yourself to the machine?
No, no, access to,
How so?
like, but just talking to it.
So okay, now in that scenario though, right? There's the risk if it's just talking to it, it's a similar type of risk than if you're talking to evil Machiavellian. Like, yeah, you're taking a risk that in some way you're going to be manipulated, you're not going to be sophisticated enough to avoid the manipulation or whatever, but it's still like the worry there is not the machine doing anything. The worry there is that people are going to be it's the interaction between the man and the machine that is a potential problem. Like foolish people with this technology are going to harm themselves. But if we try to be
Well,
wise, then
harming themselves is fine. Like, in
well,
a way,
harm other people. Yeah, totally.
yeah, what is it? FAFO. Like, okay, you did something silly.
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah,
the real problem again is when somebody tell let can we construct a really bad scenario out of completely vanilla
yeah,
services, right? Access to Safeway, the supermarket
yeah,
for the not people who are not here, access to the supermarket, bank account with like not too much money, whatever,
yeah, yeah,
can it think of like a plan to, like, I don't know, construct a bomb and do blackmail somebody with this sort of home cleaning product manufactured. It gets right. It takes somebody from TaskRabbit. It gives them instructions to basically make a homemade, right,
yeah, right.
and then says, and it looks like the device that you have to diffuse, right, and then it sends a digital sort of Bitcoin style scam to somebody and saying, like, unless you deposit $300 to this bank account, I will not give you the code to defuse this this bomb that is in your building, whatever, right? Like, but you can think of how it can it doesn't have to be like, here's a nuclear bomb. It could be like, here's a supermarket, right?
Well, okay, let's play that scenario out. I love this. Okay, so let me first of all, let me try to put it in my own language and see if this is going to help somebody. So, okay, I'm trying here. I'm working the brain today. So imagine that there is a bunch of techniques for the digital manipulation of information, and that there's a bunch of ways that you can accomplish goals with the right tools for the algorithmic manipulation of information gives you the ability to accomplish certain goals, especially in the digital world. Okay. All right. So imagine there's like there's one centralized gigantic pile of tools for the manipulation of information, which allows you to do different things with those tools. So the risk or the concern is something like you will tell a child to say, hey, listen, accomplish this goal for me. And the way you accomplish the goal is you go to the pile of tools, you pick up whatever tools you need to go accomplish the goal. And the child picks up the tool, which is blackmail and extortion and maybe the nuclear code somewhere. And, all of these tools that it's using, it doesn't know what it's doing. It's just like, oh, I know this is going to accomplish the goal. So I'm going to use these tools. And that is the concern, right? That's the destructive process.
Well, that's where you need the values element to come in. Is where we were going.
Okay, so if I kind of like this analogy.
Because some things we know as humans, some things are acceptable and some things are unacceptable.
Okay. So let's play out this childish scenario, right? So it's this technology with this big old pile of tools, and we're discovering in real time, we don't have a way to do this that isn't causing destruction. So the people that are, for example, right, people that are plugging in their APIs into ChatGPT have their computers explode. It's like, okay, well, we keep doing this thing and it's like failing, and then I plugged my computer in and this weird thing happened and somebody showed up at my house or whatever. If that were the risks, or if that was actually what was happening, wouldn't we conclude, oh, this technology doesn't actually work, or you shouldn't plug in, or like it doesn't have a way to skillfully choose what tools it's using, so don't bother with it, don't plug in? Like, how do we get to the scenario when it's like, there was enough tools there that we asked the child that one request and it picked all of them up, and then humanity goes extinct? Why wouldn't we be like, oh, okay, this system is failing, it's more complex than we can handle, so we're not gonna use it?
Well, first of all, the first question is if we're all gonna just, there's no we, right? Fundamentally, in humanity, like we are a bunch of different agents, and different people are gonna make different decisions. So one group might have certain beliefs, the other group might have other beliefs, and
right.
And we also use machines in warfare, right? So some of us, unfortunately, are quite happy to deploy lethal machines against others, and of course the others don't like that, but they don't get really a choice or whatever, right? There's all sorts of permutations of this question. The other part, of course, is that it could be making money, or the third part, right, which it gets maybe a little bit more sophisticated, and I don't know if you're sort of if you're gonna go there with me or not, but like as it develops, the objective, it realizes that you might object to certain things it might want to do, and it might start hiding them from you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, well, I do have to do fraud, but then, master is probably not gonna like that. So, but that is bad for my objective of giving him an extra $100. So better start, keeping double books and being extra manipulative, because that's just part of the plan. It's just a plan that I'm executing, right? Like, whatever.
So let's say that's one tool in the toolbox, is deceiving the person you're trying to serve.
Yes.
Okay, now that
for their own good, you know.
I want
It's,
to put an asterisk by that one because I'm going to say I'm not sure that that is possible. That particular one, uh, I'm not sure. I'm not going to put a lot of credence on that right now. But even in that scenario, like there doesn't there the bridge between the digital and the real world seems to be the problem. Like if I were to imagine about killer drones, for example, and I'm like, okay, are killer drones a genuine threat to humans? Yeah, they're terrifying. Like, imagine killer drones were really cheap and like you just print them off and anybody could attach these, bombs to them. It's like, that's a scary scenario. But it's not because of like the software. It's because of the bridge where it's like, okay, this is where software intersects with reality in a way that causes explosions and damage. So when I'm looking at this AI example, I'm saying bridge. Okay, for example, are we saying?
I can do better. We can do better.
Well,
How do you feel
let,
about
wait, wait.
DDT?
Let me ask you one question here. Are we
Okay.
saying that the physical machinery that some people are going to build out machinery to take this technology into the real world such that they're able to manipulate it intentionally or not, that is causing destruction? So there's going to be
So I
some
don't
group of humans. Yeah.
I don't think this division between the digital and the physical world is as um robust as you're thinking about it. I think. Let me tell you something from personal experience. Um, I the company I ran for 10 years is called Balena, right? And what we did is we built a network with many hundreds of thousands of devices, probably close to a million by now. Um, that are sort of what we call IoT devices, right? Which is kind of basically small Linux computers that were doing things in the world, right? Our network is digital. Like the way to take control of it is digital. But if you're inside and you get to the devices somehow, which is our nightmare scenario from a security perspective, but let's you're a super intelligent AI, that's not your problem. You are now sort of looking at trucks and drones and cameras and actuators of all kinds and
Yes.
blah
Yes.
blah blah,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
it's all
Yes.
API requests as far as you're concerned, right? It's
Yes.
all
Yes.
digits that you're sending to an Amazon data center, but those are causing things in the real world, all sorts of
Totally valid.
varieties.
Totally valid. Yes, I follow
And
along.
that's something
Completely
I've
agree.
built. There's a
Yeah.
small super highway between the digital and the physical, and
Right.
it's not the only one. There's like millions of those, or
Okay.
whatever, thousands.
Let's go with that example because that's a great one, and you have personal experience here. Okay. I have no difficulty envisioning a whole bunch of different physical systems being integrated into this AI,
Right,
or just the internet for that matter, and like being
right.
able to centrally control how self-driving vehicles are moving on the roads. And then like I can imagine a scenario where a hacker hacks into the system and it says, okay, all the trucks run into each other or off the roads, go try to find
Yeah, yeah. Like you want to
pedestrians and
assassinate,
run
and you
into them.
just wait for the right person to, Yeah.
Totally. So I look at that and I go, okay, but the problem is everything plugging in. Can't we? So if I'm living out in, let's say the countryside, and I'm like, I'm just extracting recipes from the AI. Why would I be at risk when I haven't plugged anything in and I'm not around systems that are all plugged into this thing?
Okay, so now we're saying that the concern is not really plugging things into the AI, but plugging things into the internet, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, sort of.
Okay,
Yeah, that's more fundamental. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So and yours, well, I mean, the thing is that the AI could do things in the pursuit of some objective that it, like the fear I have, and it applies to the state as it applies to the AI, is Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? Like doing a whole bunch of really bad things while you're trying to
Yeah.
do something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've experienced that with the last few years. And the reason I asked you, by the way, how you feel about DDT is because they used to spray children with that for
Yeah.
lice, I think,
Yeah.
which sounded like a good idea at the time, I must believe, but it sure sounds pretty stupid.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So we do, we pursue all sorts of plans. And they can have planetary consequence, right? Because you're not really living in a civilization of one, I would presume. You are part of a network, right? And if you're in the what is the islands that India is defending, where literally these people are living almost cut off from the rest of humanity. There's like a chain of islands
Hmm.
in the Indian Ocean that India has basically declared, modernity free zones, and you're not just allowed to go. And there are some tribes there that are effectively, uncontacted or ish.
Hmm.
Um, right. So those people are fine, in most
No, is that
scenarios.
true? Is that true though? Is that true that
No,
there's a
no, no, no. Well,
sufficient
that's the
air
thing.
gap? Yeah.
Because I mean, if nukes start flying, then they don't get a choice. If
So yeah.
the core of the Earth is breached, they don't get a choice. There's a bunch of situations where things could go sufficiently badly
Right.
that
Okay. So strategic planning here for this technology. Here's a naive way to not have AI kill you. Uh, don't plug really valuable parts of your life into it and have a sufficiently wide air gap between you and this tech such that it doesn't kill you in ways that you didn't foresee. Why is that
yeah.
naive?
Um, the uh, Everything hangs in the balance of what sufficiently wide means, right? The more intelligent the thing, the more wide the air gap. The more important is what traverses the air gap, right? Like how
So
the
can I change the phraseology of what you just said? I think it's
Mhm.
actually difficult or confusing to say the more intelligent the AI because
the
so
more
so how about
capable
well,
of
well,
optimization, let's call it.
let's go back to the pile of tools analogy. The more tools there are, and more sophisticated tools that there are in this gigantic pile of tools that the child is going to go to try to accomplish goals, the more you need to be you need to recognize that some of those tools could harm you, right?
Let me put it this way. The more capable it is to compose ever more complicated plans, the fewer tools it can be trusted with.
That seems like a wise principle.
Yeah, a sufficiently competent adversary can kill you with a teddy bear,
Uh,
presumably.
Another way to illustrate the point, if there were a way to hook your heart up to the internet, don't do it.
you know, depends on who's holding a gun to my head, but yeah,
Yeah,
fine.
right.
Um, but you see what I mean, though, right? Like what I'm saying is, the more able it is to break abstractions down, think things
Yeah.
on the molecular level, on the whatever, the fibers of the cloth, on the the chemicals of the fibers, like the more able it is to like see things from more perspectives, the more damage it can do with the more
Yes.
things that we consider to be
And,
inert.
and I couldn't we say something similar about electricity? That listen, this could be amazing, and there's all the more power we're getting from the nuclear power plants, the more your behavior needs to be restricted such that you don't zap yourself, right? Same kind of
I guess
concept.
so. The point is that there's no plans to restrict anything right now.
Okay, well, let's talk about this idea. What do you mean there's no plans to restrict anything? Like if I were to talk to anybody on the street about this stuff, they go, "Yeah, I'm not going to plug into that," or like maybe if I this could create
It's already
value
plugged
for me.
in, so it's done. It's sufficient capabilities are plugged in that sufficiently complicated plans are possible. That it's not really a personal choice anymore.
Well, how though? I mean, like if my neighbor is not participating in this at all,
No, but I mean, if a an agent like the one we're talking about can destroy the stock market, your neighbor will
true.
bear the
Okay.
consequences.
Fair. Okay. Right. So let's say this is an interesting way of reframing
And the
things.
stock market is kind of plugged in.
Yes, interesting way of reframing things. Okay. Let's let's expand the digital world to include, I mean, it's not really expanding, this is what it is, to include bank accounts and finance and the stock market and a whole bunch of things that have already been totally taken over by digitization. Okay. And you're saying you're already plugged in. Well, I might respond, okay, well, humans are developing new technology and have become too reliant on this one system that a lot of people are recognizing we become too reliant on. And so we're just going to be able to structure our lives to develop more air gaps. Where I say, in addition to the bank account that I have with it's all digital, I'm going to have, physical assets, and I'm going to have patterns in my life where I'm not, I have backup plans in case the digital world explodes.
Yeah. Then you got the biological network that we are all also part of, right? As we recently experienced. And then we got the fact that the planet is the planet. I guess what I'm trying to get you to is to sort of give up hope that we can sufficiently and close this technology.
Well, I'm doing
Such
the
that it
opposite of
can.
that. That's the position right now, all of my intuitions are leaning in the opposite direction. I'm saying, okay, this is going to be amazing, but don't plug into it. Don't plug. It seems to me the worst thing you could possibly do would be plug your brain into this thing. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
why? What? Can you paint for me the case in which I actually can't have? So if I have a bunch of physical assets, let's say I'm wealthy, and that means I have a bunch of cows, and like I've got my whole system where it's not super digitized. Am I at risk? And if so, how am I at risk in a unique way than, somebody maliciously trying to use technology to like have a autonomous drone blow me up or something?
Again, right? You are dependent on a world supply chain and a world financial system that if it goes, you are in trouble.
Yeah, but I'm not in trouble. Yes. Experiencing pain. Yes. But I
Yeah,
don't.
I don't know how to hunt. I don't know how to live in the wild. I
Okay, but
kind of
you
need the
can.
supermarkets to be stocked.
Okay, but hey, let's play with that. So let's say, like, couldn't it be a cultural value that we say, hey, things are so digitized and centralized, we can't get rid of all of the other knowledge of how to live life just in case this one implodes. And so all you don't personally necessarily need to know how to hunt, though it couldn't hurt. You just need to be connected to a human network of people who, if shit hits the fan, are going to be able to take care of you and teach you how to hunt, right?
Okay, this is great. Let me describe to you. This is an idea that came up when I was Belena, about how to manage these digital devices with while minimizing the danger of the remote network going crazy, right? Because you can imagine like all these devices, but also a big one that was like tapping into them at different times. So the model I used for it in my mind, like the ideal, and I mean with probably got quite far along that direction, was that the device just works, right? You want the device in the state that it works. If the internet was to go away, the server was to disappear, you want the
Yeah.
your digital mixer, whatever it is you've got, right, the thermostat, to not stop working because the internet went away, right? You wanted to have its functionality is what it is. So then what does the internet do for it? Well, it comes in, it shifts it from state to state, right? From version 3 to version 4 of the software or whatever. It does whatever housekeeping it needs to do, and then it steps back, right? So you can imagine a human civilization that is somewhat similar in the sense that we're living a fairly pre-digital life of sorts, and then the AI is able to provide us with um, improvements to it that we can implement, but always with the idea that if it were to disappear, well,
Yeah.
we would just continue from that civilization. That is one way to think about it. You know, I don't see that scenario as realistic, but that would
Why
be
not?
the kind of a steelman of that whole.
Let's put it in more tech terms here. What if what we could do to adjust to this technology is focus our efforts on firewalls, not just firewalls in the straightforward sense, but the extended concept of firewalls, which includes like how you structure your physical life, and like you could think of being connected to a group of people that know how to hunt as a kind of a firewall from the digital world. So we focus
Right.
our efforts on the firewall so we can have plug and play, but we're not like we can't, we can unplug if we need to.
So here's the let's up the risk level here a little bit, right? And by a little bit, I mean a lot. But now let's say that you have an agent that has been told to basically accomplish something big, right? Like, I don't know, colonize space, right? And maybe it's like some little country that is fanatical. Let's say North Korea, right? Just so they set their mind to building the biggest LLM they can get their hands on, right?
Yeah.
They lie, cheat, steal, that they don't care,
Yep.
and all they want is to paint their dear leader's face on as many heavenly bodies as possible. That's the
A valuable
um,
goal.
that's the object. Hey, I mean, don't knock it till you tried it. But have you? How many heavenly bodies have you painted the
You should
face
see
of
my
their dear leader
ceiling. There's Mao up here, and
so so the point is, if it has a big enough objective, then resources become the thing you contend with. It's like, there's a planet, there's resources, I can use them to do stuff with, right? Every human that's walking around is some, I don't know, iron I can use for, one, nth of a spaceship. So they need to be dematerialized and repositioned. It's not trying to kill you. It's
but
just got better use for your atoms, right?
but in that scenario, if we play that out, that still requires the physical embodied machine. There has to be something which is physically executing that, right? And it seems like if that, if you even if you got this super sophisticated AI and it's in a mechanical body and it's like walking towards you with a knife to get your atoms, figuratively speaking, isn't that something we could deal with? It's like, okay, well, obviously, the rogue machine bodies are going to be a general problem. So if we're worried about this thing escaping the digital world, then we say, okay, when we need techniques to be able to take down machine bodies. Couldn't we do
Okay, so
that?
you're not saying like someone is plugged off of the internet. You're saying everybody's plugged up of the internet,
No, what I'm saying
or we don't let
is
it on the internet.
what I'm saying is that we have we're trying to be wise in our relationship with this technology. I say, don't plug your heart in, don't plug your brain in, don't plug all of your finances into this thing. In the real
But do we
world,
continue to have the stock market plugged in?
I think it's fair to say that is going to be inevitable. I could also imagine a world. I can imagine a world in which there's enough people see the systemic problems enough such that they try to build an alternative. But I can imagine the stock market being part of this. Yeah.
All right, so that's, to the degree that enough stuff is plugged in, then it's you're right as an individual. I guess here's the thing, right? The so long as if this agent becomes, if we built a is the word agent, are we cool to use it now?
I cringe, but let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, if this agent, let's say, has a sufficiently audacious objective, then its survival becomes a key part of its plan, right? It needs to be there in order to do the next thing.
So how is that concept part of the toolbox? Like, can you give me, is there a way to encode what you just said? Where it's like, oh, and by the way, have a self-conception and navigate such that you preserve yourself.
Well, it registers itself as one of the tools um, in the box, right? Because essentially you can make plans up to a point, but at some point, if you go out long enough, uncertainty dominates your perception. So you're like, well, I gotta be there to make the next installment of the plan or to fine tune or whatever, right? So
And
your plan includes yourself.
and do you think that, let's call that pseudo self-awareness, do you think
Yep.
there's a way to do that in, say, the LLM algorithm?
No. What I'm saying is there's a way to use the LM algorithm to create a plan that includes self-preservation.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. If you think that that seems like a pretty sophisticated concept of visualizing yourself in the future and recognizing that you're a means to an end of the goal that you're accomplishing. You're saying already you think that pattern can be digitized and utilized by an LLM.
Here's something interesting that I've figured out.
Is that what I'm sorry? Is that what you're
I'll
saying
I'll,
though?
I'll answer with
Okay. Okay.
a small aside.
Okay.
The the terms you can use to communicate with this thing, it we used to think that, like, complexity from the point of view of the intelligence of the optimizing thing, whatever you want to call it, would be something like Kolmogorov complexity or whatever, like things like in terms of information theory. What actually ends up happening right now, and it could be temporary, but like right today, if I wanted to work with ChatGPT, the relevant nature of complexity that I would be optimizing around would be um, how often do people talk about this thing, right? How well discussed is it? Right. So so for instance, when I say like write me an application to do X, I can actually, so there's this very well known example of an app called a to do app, right? And I can just tell it, write me a to do app, and it does it. Now that is because that is a standard pattern that has been written about in 1,000 languages, which has to do with just because that's how you demo
Yeah,
a
right.
new
Right.
framework.
Right.
Right. So I didn't have to explain to that what that is because that it understands that because people have talked about that concept to
Yeah, right.
death.
Right.
So to the degree that people talk about maintaining their own existence quite a bit on the internet, it's got quite a bit of.
Okay, let me push back here. So this is where understanding of a concept might actually play a role. What it's going to have is an abstract pattern recognizer of words about self-preservation. But how do you get from the pattern of words about self-preservation to a functional tool that results in actual self-preservation?
Right. So again, this is the two-step process, right? Where you ask it to make a plan. Now we're assuming it's good at making plans, right? And that if GPT-4 is not that good, then GPT-20 is going to be. So we're adding a little bit of like extra capability that is not present today. But the idea is that it would say something like, look, you need to accomplish this thing, and you need to, this agent, which is yourself, to be there for that thing to be accomplished. And in order to make sure that you're there, right, you want to, make sure to kill all humans because they might get in the way. And in order to do that, like it's just like very matter of fact recipe style, um, you know,
Okay.
maximization of the probability of accomplishing your objective.
Okay, here I'm trying to get at this concept. I think I'm getting close to what I'm trying to say. Is there not a difference between the pattern, the abstract pattern that is humans discussing the concept of self-preservation from the abstract pattern that is self-preservation? So I could imagine the chat GPT telling a story that involves, well, what does self-preservation mean? It means killing all humans, making sure I don't get shut off. But the pattern of words of making sure I don't get shut off because I'm trying to preserve myself is a different pattern than actually ensuring that you don't get turned off, right?
So here's this I think is the magic thing that is happening and surprising all of us, right? This thing is able to it's almost like our words are like pebbles in a pond or something, and it's able to hop through our words, right? Because it might not understand, or I gather that the word understand has a lot of overloaded meaning, but like it might not be doing anything like human brains are doing, but it is walking on our footsteps, right? Have you heard of the expression pave the cow paths?
Mm-mm.
So there's this idea that like I mean, if you Google it, you'll see a lot of pictures of of a similar concept, but like instead of deciding where to put the what to pave in a field, right? You just see where the cows have already been walking, right, by where the grass is worn out, and you just pave that because hey,
Yeah.
right, that doesn't make you a cow necessarily, or be able to share in cowness. All you know is that they seem to be going that way for some reason, right? Or the same thing with students in a college sort of environment where you got these large, greens, right? You can just make them unpaved, see where people walk around but where the grass is worn out, and then go and pave
Yeah,
over
yeah.
it. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean you understand that like the bar and the dorm are close enough and the people are going off for late night hookups, but you do realize that the grass is warm between the the bar and the dorms, right? So you end up being like, well, this is an important
Okay. Yeah,
linkage.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, let me try to put this in my own language here. So this is sort of what we were just describing before about the specific, um, uh, um, random token predictor algorithm being able to do more than we would have expected. So so would it be fair to say there's an assumption that the patterns, I'll put it this way, this is interesting. There's an assumption here that the patterns the machine is going to discover by analyzing our language are there through some algorithmic magic. Those patterns are going to be sufficiently useful enough where they can actually act on what the pattern of self-preservation. By analyzing our language patterns, they can figure out how to preserve themselves and not just figure out how to talk about preserve themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's key. And
Especially if they're plugged into the right systems, right? Again, like I'm assuming that they can make a plan that they can execute.
okay, so that concept right there is an unknown, and that's what people need to be thinking about. Which is I don't know if there's a term for this, but which is the divergence between the thing that's being, how is there a way to encapsulate how different a linguistic pattern is from the instantiation of it? Or like because it could be that there are these, I can imagine a world in which there are huge chasms between
Right.
the patterns that we're using in language to describe a thing and the patterns that are required to do a thing.
Right. Here's something very interesting that happened yesterday that might help, right? So this is going to get a little bit technical, but I think I can communicate in a way that doesn't require like really a lot of understanding. But this is about the plugin system that OpenAI just released.
Yeah.
So OpenAI released this plugin system, and this engineer, I mean slash CEO, I think his name is Michael Hashimoto. I hope I'm not getting it wrong. Um, has built like lots and lots of systems with lots and lots of plugins. He says that he was shocked at how amazing the OpenAI plugin system was. Why? Right? Because normally a plugin system requires you to write structured data, right? Be very, very specific about, which version of which system you're attaching to and which API call you're using, and put the parameters in the exact right order, and effectively program the two things to work together in some way, right? Give them enough information so one of them can utilize the other or both. And for OpenAI, he was like, I don't understand. Like, I just literally, it required me to provide a natural language description of what it is I was doing, and it kind of did it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So again,
Yeah, yeah,
this is
yeah.
the thing I think that is worth freaking out properly about, which is that it seems to be using these kind of thought threads that have been deposited by us on the internet to and combine them into some pretty big ropes.
Okay, here's a claim. Here's a claim. I don't know if it's true or not. Okay. Okay. Let me just ask you first. Is there a term for this concept of the difference between the linguistic pattern and the actualized pattern?
I don't know. I would say like map and territory is probably how
Okay.
it.
I just didn't know if in AI, if there was I'm pointing at
So
something
here's
that's
the
already
thing.
there.
I'm also like not formally trained in this stuff or fully aware of how
Okay.
much of the literature I've got. So
Okay. Okay. I just didn't know if this is
not
like,
to my knowledge, but not that means much.
okay, here's an observation. I would expect it to be that algorithms are going to be really good at, let's say, linguistic pattern algorithms are going to be really good at doing things like code, like really good. Like the idea of, well, there's obviously a tight connection between language and code. So when somebody says, I was shocked by the capacity of the machine to have a API integration that used natural language, I'm thinking, okay, I'm less shocked because of how I think about that pattern, what is required to get that pattern. But I think outside of code in the digital world, the patterns that are required to accomplish goals are way different than the patterns that we use to describe how we want to accomplish the goal. So I think there's a spectrum here of things like, how powerful is language? Like, another way of putting it, how powerful are the patterns that we're encoding in language? What can we do with the
Yeah.
patterns that we're encoding in our natural language? And it seems to me, I have noticed something, which is the people who are computer programmers tend to think like everything is wrapped up in the patterns that we encode in our natural language. And that might be an error. It might be that there's actually almost a categorical gap between the patterns of how we talk about self-preservation and the ability to self-preserve.
So here's maybe a different way to articulate this, which might help process where the next interesting step is. Coders have been using code to do things in the real world forever, right? I mean, lots and lots of things in the real world are happening with code. We did not used to think until like literally yesterday, or well, some of us, I guess somebody woke up yesterday. I woke up this week. We did not used to think that the gap between natural language and code could be closed so easily.
Right.
In fact, we would
yeah.
probably have argued you to death that this is not possible because this is our job. Right until very recently, and you're seeing people collectively in shock.
Yes. I think this
this
is why this. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's going poof. It's going poof. The gap is going poof, right? Like, and they know it's going poof because they're using all these AI assistants. The joke I saw on Twitter yesterday was like, oh wow, I saw a dude in a coffee house writing code on like Visual Studio Code with no Copilot or anything. He was just like going manual, like like that. Somehow that's kind of a strange observation, because people have been so acquainted with this new layer now, right? That it almost feels like the difference between a car and a bicycle.
Okay, sorry, I'm just writing something down here. So I don't forget. Okay. This is really good.
So basically, the thing is observing that, right, and knowing that if you get to code, you can get quite far in the physical world, right? We thought that the installation was language to code, and that one is collapsing now.
Well, I'm not sure what is when you say we get to the physical world, and have we? So can you describe for me a situation where the robot executing code in the physical world is accomplishing more than we thought it could? Like in recent, when I think about robotics or whatever, I don't look at something and go, I didn't realize the machine could do that. Like I have when we're talking about the natural language to code gap. I'm like, yeah, that's unexpected. But is there something similar going on in the physical world?
No, it's just that if you are able to build, to bridge that gap between language and code, you are now able to bridge that linguistic network of all the thoughts people have ever had, which is sort of conceptual, right?
Okay.
And then almost on demand pierce through into action.
Well, this is the question here. So that seems like a very, very, very open question. So maybe actually one area we need to research is the philosophy of language, because I could tell a story, I could tell a picture in which coders underestimated the similarities between natural language and code. And I think that is true so far. Like coders underestimated the similarities of the patterns found in natural language with patterns as they could be executed in code. And if that's true, if that's correct, then I could say, okay, well, just because there was the code natural language gap got collapsed or is collapsing, that does not actually give us reason to think that the natural language reality gap generally in the physical world is going to collapse. Like, for example, I think we really somebody needs to put their brains together and figure out how different the pattern is of self-preservation from the linguistic patterns of us talking about self-preservation. Because to me, just intuitively, I'm thinking the gap in behavior of talking about self-preservation seems extraordinarily large to what that means in the world with self-preservation.
I mean, ultimately, what it means is minimizing threats to your continued existence, right? Or,
but the thing is, talking about minimizing threats to your continued existence is very different pattern from minimizing threats to your continued existence. Like, so those patterns, the patterns that we're training the machine on are linguistic patterns. Linguistic patterns are going to port over to code patterns. But what if these are very different patterns from doing things, sophisticated things like self-preservation in the world?
I mean, unless self-preservation is an exception for some interesting reason because of recursion or something, which it might or might not be. But code does very interesting things in the real world today, right? So, the again, to me, the safety was you got the language world over here, action world over here, and the wall has been breached, and that's the scary thing.
I think there are possibly more walls here than
I mean, I sure hope
people
you're
can
right.
see.
What are you having in mind?
Well, so let's see. Just in the abstract, I could say I could come up. So I think I have the ability, if I were to stumble through it, to explain why there is not a huge gap between natural language and code. That is to say that the patterns we're trying to capture in natural language are going to be in the same category as the patterns we're trying to capture in code. Okay. I think I could also tell a story or an explanation for why those patterns are not the patterns that are in reality for everyday beings like you and I. That, in fact, yeah, gosh, how to say this? I don't know how to say it. It's too distant a concept for me to put into language, but I would say I would like to see evidence somewhere that the same algorithm is going to result in real world unexpected behavior as it has with the code natural language gap, as with the natural language action gap. And part of the reason, this is fascinating, Alex. So part of the reason I object to some of the claims about agency and understanding and intelligence and all these terms is because I think what people are doing is they're porting processes into the machine that aren't there. So maybe this is why I'm skeptical about some of these claims, is because I'm going, there is a gap between, there's a totally different language. I might rephrase it now. Guys, you're missing that there is a gap between the patterns in our natural language and being able to accomplish things in the world.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm saying if a machine has mastered linguistic patterns, I actually don't think that I don't see a positive reason to believe that results in mastery of the physical world in a way we can't get a hold of. Because that
do you see
thing, yeah.
Do you see this? I don't know if you can see this. There's a printer on my repair table.
Yeah.
Back there, right? 3D printers are a fantastic use case.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what first of all, they turn code into real things. So that's kind of I see them almost as a portal, right? You can literally write code, and through some set of steps, it turns into movements of the print head that then if all goes well, and clearly for that guy it didn't because problems, which is why it needs a repair now. I shorted it. You get an object, right? So that's a real crossing of a boundary between the physical world and the digital world.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, you can
we run with
code and it can short circuit itself and catch fire.
Sure.
Probably.
So
if you're malicious enough.
Let me try to respond to that one. So if there is a small gap between the pattern of language of what it means to say move one unit to the left, move one unit to the right, put the little piece of filament down. If that's a small gap, then I could say, well, of course, that there's going to be a small gap between the digital and the physical. And for me, because I'm a finitist, like this is how I think about the physical world. Like I'm partial to digital physics, the idea that
Right.
things like all the way down,
Yeah.
but I also am a pluralist where I don't think that's all of reality. I think for the spatial world, for the physical world, I think it's fundamentally digital, which means that this technology like can get you to a significant mastery of non-living things, of just like I can imagine 3D printers to the subatomic level, and that the digital method is going to be able to construct these submicroscopic structures. I think that I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be possible. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. It would just be like, wow, that's amazing technology. But I don't think that is the entirety of that doesn't exhaust all of the ontological categories. That's not, I don't think that's what all the mind is doing, is able to be reduced in that way. I think as an ontological pluralist, it's like, okay, but there is, humans are doing something in the machines when we're doing the language thing. We're able to encode patterns and execute patterns that I don't think you're going to find in the language. And I think a lot of them, actually, I think there's a lot of patterns like this that aren't able to be digitized in the same way and see such such obvious results in the world.
Here's maybe a way to I'm going to attempt to do something now that is, I generally try to keep us, grounded and unconceptual, because that's where I suspect we get lost. But I'm going to attempt a leap to the other side.
Yeah, go for it.
A way to express what is scary that I think will make sense to you, even though I don't think I don't have the same framework, but I, to a degree, I understand some of your framework. What kind of the scary scenario is that our talking on the internet for all this time and digitization of a lot of our reactions, right, has put enough cowpath paving, right, a lot of thought threads, enough that something that can't do that can't connect the words in quite the same way, can now, walk in our footsteps, or stand on our shoulders, or whatever, to do as if that, in a way that it can
Yeah.
actually start to execute things in the real world by hopping between pebbles in a lake, even though it's not able to place those pebbles in the first place.
And a scary scenario, which I also see, is the embodiment idea, especially if you imagine, I don't know if we'll ever get here, but if you imagine, skin suits for these things that are extremely sophisticated, where we can't immediately tell if a thing is a computer or if it's a human, I can absolutely see those disaster scenarios. But when I'm thinking, how do we adjust to that? I'm going, okay, first of all, have an air gap where you're not plugging everything into the system, but also have a way of trying to identify what is a robot and what isn't. So you're dealing with these pseudo entities and pseudo agents where you have an EMP in your back pocket just in case things get kind of crazy. That seems like one way of dealing with the threat, right?
Not really. If there's enough capability plugged into the internet, right, it can do things that will affect you whether you are connected to the internet or not.
It'll affect you, like we could say crashing the stock market. But I don't think if the stock market crashes, that's like, extermination type thing. I think a lot of people are going to get screwed, and I wouldn't want to be in the middle of a city or Manhattan if that happens. But I don't view that as like, and in fact, I would say there's a lot of people out there, and have been for a long time, who think that a crash like that is coming, that it's inevitable, that it's a house of cards, and they're already preparing for that type of thing. So I wouldn't think they're going to, that'd be a terrible.
Right. I mean, that doesn't get humanity extinct, but
yeah.
I guess, let me put it this way, right? If you think it can trigger a situation where 4 out of 5 people die, you can probably get to the point where you can think that it can kill 5 or 5.
I'm having a hard time getting to the 4 out of 5. Like, I don't think so I can tell stories in which the nuclear, people who own the nukes plug the nukes into the thing and then it, shoots off and destroys. I can tell that story, but when I'm conceiving of that problem, I think, well, that's a human problem. That's not a tech problem. The story of like the embodied runaway thing, technology that gets into these islands in India, I find that much harder to think we wouldn't be able to adjust to that
So like,
successfully.
can you think of ways in which the AI could read the news and manipulate the stock market in such a way as to cause nuclear war?
Whether or not I could imagine a kind of the AI being able to cause a nuclear war without having direct access to the nukes. And I can imagine such a scenario, especially if we don't upgrade our epistemics about this technology. Like, if we remain as foolish as we are and we plug in as many things into it as people want to do, maybe nukes not included, then I think we're asking for trouble. But I also think that those types of disaster situations, I think, can be avoided just with better information and more wisdom uh, about, let's say, how to recognize just how potentially fragile this system is. And given its inherent fragility and ability to be manipulated, that we need to be cautious. I think like wouldn't like I the way I'm thinking about it, I'm going, okay, disaster. But in that disaster scenario, it's still humans. It's still humans being idiots that put too much into a fragile system.
Okay, so I think let's park that there in the sense that like I want to have more conversations with you, but I think it's the sort of thing that we need to sort of, you know, I think we've come a long way towards bridging the gap.
Yes.
I think there's different positions about like how scared you should be of the thing, how much intelligence can work around your most devious plans of air gapping it, etc. And again, that's a conversation I think I'd love to continue to have, but I want to throw a couple of ideas at you.
Okay.
Like once we put that in a box, right, the
Sure.
AI is scary. My current position is as follows, right, and this is a little bit of an interesting sort of horseshoe theory kind of thing. My sense is that it is not, it is almost like not a viable thing to try to limit an optimization engine that gets better and better, right? It's just, it'll find a way. And I realize that this is a complicated topic again, and we're going to talk about it. But if you take that presupposition, then this is where I end up saying the only way out is through, or in Elon's words, if you can't beat them, join them. Where we're like, well, if it's gonna be doing stuff, it might as well be harnessed to humans rather than be given free reign to do whatever, right? Because we're not going to be able to verbalize the perfect objective and set it free, right? Like that's not going to. Like, we've seen that movie before. Funnily enough, OpenAI seems to have pulled exactly that on Elon, where he thought he was funding a nonprofit with 100 million. He gave $100 million to start OpenAI as a nonprofit that would do AI as open source. Right, that's the name. OpenAI means open source artificial intelligence.
Yeah, right.
And then and with that initial progress and money, they founded a for-profit subsidiary, which,
oh my gosh, that's so dastardly.
Right, which has sold 50% of its stock to Microsoft.
Terrible. How is that legal? That should not be legal.
It's apparently legal.
Oh, that's
but
terrible.
It's funny because of the alignment problem, right? You
Yeah.
have an AI and you got an alignment problem, and then even the organization that you make to like to solve that problem by opening up the AI, right? Because the whole point was to level the playing field. That was the idea that they had when they started it, and it was everybody from like Peter Thiel to Elon Musk to Paul Graham to a bunch of others, right? And they poached the CTO from Stripe, Greg Brockman, a bunch of others, right? And then Elon, it looks like, and I'm sure he's not as surprised as he's seeming, but like let's just take it at face value. turns around and is like, what the hell? What's happening? They're selling it to Microsoft and hosting it on Azure.
Yeah.
Like what's happening? Anyway, but okay, so but to me, like, you just are not going to be able to align it from a distance. You're just going to have to jump in there
Okay.
and beat it. Okay, that's an interesting tension, right? Like, do you
Yes.
try to run away from it as much as
Right.
possible, or like hold it like at arm's length, or do you, well, you're like, well, the only way out is through,
That
and
is the, yeah. Well, I want to, here's a meta answer that what we're going to see in the world is both approaches. I have no doubt about that.
right.
If we're saying that this system is inherently as fragile as the digital world seems to be, then I would say, if you're telling me here's a system that's like wildly fragile, the way to avoid the fragility is by joining it. I'm like, ooh, my intuitions go the opposite direction. And it's not necessarily to run away from it. It's just to know exactly what to know how to plug the thing into the wall.
So
And
I think what we both agree on, which I'm seeing a desperate lack of it on Twitter, but then again, I should expect to, is that we need to understand this thing a lot better than we do,
yes,
right?
yes,
And I use the word "this thing" first because it's fun, but also because I really don't want to framework it at all.
yes,
Almost, right? I want to
right,
be. It's not a mind. It's not a person. It's not a box. It's not a
yes,
computer. It's not a, well, it's a thing. Right now, for me, it's a thing, and it is displaying some very interesting
yes,
characteristics. Um, but here's the other part, right? Let's talk a little bit about, maybe that's a good tail to the conversation, about what happens with, even if people believe that this is a very powerful technology, right? Forget what it can do.
yeah,
Let's just take
yeah,
what people think it can do, right?
yeah.
So you're China right now. The U.S. has blocked you out of chip technology, and you perceive that this thing is going to just foreclose all future for you as China, right? And every day that passes, the U.S. is making huge advances in this stuff, um, and is another day where you don't have access to 3 nanometer manufacturing, or if you have some top secret facility, it's not going to be able to produce, just like spit out 10 data centers enough to train your own.
Yeah, right.
They have released something apparently that I saw a very fun nickname for it with Chat CCP.
That's great.
But it's not that impressive.
And
Anyway,
think about the patterns that they would have about how great their dear leader is. Man, those are going to be painted everywhere and every possible permutation.
I don't feel like I'm in a position to brag about ideological, distortion of the AI, given what we're doing to it. My only hope is that the woke stuff they're doing over here is superficial and will be like,
Yeah,
thrown off like a bad harness. But I sure hope it doesn't, somehow seep into the core.
right.
But
So,
anyway,
so your
yeah,
point is, there's a secondary set of questions, which is humans and their beliefs in regards to the power of the system. And then immediately we're into the domain of geopolitics. What might they
exactly.
do? Yeah, right,
Because again, if you perceive the situation to be true, and it doesn't really matter if there is or not,
right.
right? Then the difference between the position of China today and Japan when the U.S. sort of stopped, declared an oil embargo. I think that's what happened in the Second World War anyway. Before to put Japan in dire straits, to have to do
Yep.
something,
Yeah.
is not that different. Is the point?
Totally. Yeah. Well, the geopolitics of this are not simple, and that's a whole other can of worms.
And the thing is, I'm not a geopolitics person, right?
Yeah,
I'm asking you in case you have more insights, but honestly, this is kind of the problem with this whole situation. It touches all the things.
yeah. Well, the thing I keep coming back to is just the humans. It's just the humans. Humans. It's a human problem, and I think we can come up with human solutions, but we gotta. I really think critical thinking here is going to be very important, and even strategically important for the matter of geopolitics. Actually,
Hmm.
having a clear picture of exactly what we're dealing with and what we aren't is going to be
I
an
think we have the
enormous
best
advantage.
geopoliticians in charge, especially in the
Yes, no,
U.S.
I'm going to
A
talk to Biden
very
right
long
after
time. It's a
this.
good batch. It's a good
Yeah,
batch, this one. So I think we're in
yeah,
good hands.
or maybe a new emerging polity. Let's say that
Unless
if
you're a
there is such a
pipeline, in
thing.
which case, not good for you. But
Well, so let me paint the picture then. The picture I'm currently seeing is that we are going to see people who are going to see the power and the fragility of the system, and they're going to want to try to merge with it. And you're going to have people who see the power and fragility of the system, they're going to want to run away from it. And some variations of like having an air gap, let's say, so you can get the best parts and not have your brain explode. So that itself is an important thing to think about and discuss, because we're talking about potentially wildly different cultural divergence, an informational divergence, and the thing I'm probably most concerned with here is the biological divergence, where if the people that choose to go along with this machine have a way to change their brain structure to reduce the size of the bottleneck between the information in the machine and the brain, you could be dealing with a different kind of biological entity, one that, how do we align that biological entity's goals with the unaugmented humans? That's where that to me almost looks like a political problem. You might be bumping into political problems here of what do you have when you have wildly different values and beliefs and access to information and maybe brain structure. That seems very scary to me. But that's where I would right now frame a big burning issue is that right there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that make me cautiously optimistic, right? About this thing, at least on the other side of it, right? So I bracket out how do we get there, right? And because look, from where I'm standing, I tweet often everything is obsolete, and I kind of mean everything is obsolete, from physical objects to organizations to potentially conceptual distinctions that we are making, in divisions between fields of knowledge are about to be put under a pretty deep test. Let's just but really, like, I mean, I just foresee that every physical thing around us will be redesigned. Organizations are going to evaporate at the mere touch of this thing. But on the other side of this, and this, I might be getting into economics territory, in which case it can help me, but my sense is that there's two attractors for humans. One is like a zero sum mentality, where you get antagonistic and you try to grab from others, and the more you do that, the more others become like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This thing has the potential of being the horn of plenty, right? Where it sets off the greatest positive sum explosion the world has ever known 10 times over. In which case, I'm actually starting to get less worried about human to human, right? Because if there's good things in all directions, why bother stealing something from your neighbor, right? You're probably better off cooperating,
you
so
couple
you can
this
go
with
farther together.
like 3D printing at the microscopic level, and it's like, oh my gosh, the possibilities are utopian.
And not just that, but design is free, right? This is the thing. Like, why don't I have a keyboard that is, perfectly adjusted to my hands, right? Why does,
Right.
somebody with tiny hands and somebody with massive hands?
I agree, man. The physical world can be totally revamped by this in
Right,
in
right.
great new ways. Yeah.
But the cost is design, right? It's not even manufacturing.
It's
You could
information.
probably manufacture it, but designing something to your, it's a mess, right? So, but if you could just like snap your fingers and basically do a couple of iterations and get something, well, now we're talking. Anyway, so, but that means, and by the way, this is something else to say about our technology. Like, it's got a ton of deadweight. Even if you take a single chip, like a piece of silicon, and you read the data sheet with all the capabilities it has, and I'm not talking about like a CPU from your computer. I'm talking about like one of the the integrated circuits from a circuit board. They've got a ton of capabilities in there. Why? Because they're mass produced and they need to cover as many bases as possible, so that they're bought in enough
Yeah.
volume, so that they can be
Yeah.
used by enough use cases. So they
Mhm.
cover enough people. But by having all of that in there, like, for most people, most of that stuff is dead weight,
Right.
right? And then the boards themselves
It's
do the
such a
same thing,
wild
and then the
gosh.
code does the same thing, and then you know imagine if you could just, like, again, like, molecularly define from top to bottom exactly what you need, right? Like all of a sudden, trade-offs have been smashed. Like things that
Yeah.
were thought like, well, you got to pick, you want this or this. It's like, no, I want both 10 times over. And it's
Yeah,
like,
and
sure, we can
and
do that.
custom designed for that. I want the architecture to be exactly two functions here, and then you build the board for that function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So okay.
So, and then you iterate, right? Because then you
Right.
now have bigger,
Right.
better tools that you have made with this technology, and you can
It's
make more things
wild.
with them. And it's just like, you literally say like, we can impose our will on every molecule around us to do to be what it needs to be to do what I want, rather than some path dependency thing like legacy software goes away. Like just the level of disruption we're looking at is just mind boggling in the prosaic scenario.
Um, well, there's a lot of scenarios here too, because this is the issue that we need to think a lot about is how powerful are our linguistic patterns of talking? How many patterns are we encoding in our speech? And I could see an argument that says, in fact, there's some philosophical schools that think like everything is language. So, like in the most extreme version, you could say we have already encoded uh, one way or another, or have the ability to encode all patterns into language, and then give those patterns to the machine. And now you have like some godly thing. But that's not my take. And my take is more reserved than that. It's that there's an unknown. We don't know how many patterns we have encoded into our language, but I
Mm-hmm.
think there's going to be lots of different categories here. Like this is actually a great example. So one way that I like to learn is by importing the patterns I found in one domain into another, and chess
Yes.
into jujitsu. It's sort
Yep.
of what we're talking about here with what the computer can do. Imagine you give the computer papers, just scientific papers, to find patterns across biology and psychology and medicine and whatever. And it have the ability to do the same thing of be like the ultra generalist and find the exact same patterns over here as our could be over there,
Exactly.
and then plug them into here. So, but here's the critical part: we don't know how many patterns we are packing into our language. There's a real story we can tell in which people are losing their minds, thinking that we've done more with human language than we actually have. We can stunt the possible power of this technology if we say, oh well, there's only a subset of patterns that we've successfully encoded on our language that the machine can pick up on, right?
Okay, I'm gonna deliver to you the ultimate black pill, or at least it should be. Maybe red pill. I don't know. We'll find out. There are papers that I just remembered about now that demonstrate a swarm of robots bootstrapping a language from nothing in order to communicate. Right? Like there is a minimum amount of complexity a robot can have where they can start exchanging signals with each other and grounding stable meanings, right, independently, such that they can collaborate. So even if we've only, imprinted some small percentage of what's possible in our language, maybe the real question is it sufficient for it to bootstrap itself?
Well, so if in that scenario though, we still need some mechanism for the discovery of those patterns. And it might be that the mechanism is to be found in mind or an experience. Like maybe that's actually what experience is. I don't know. There's some like crazy metaphysical possibilities here. But even if they were bootstrapping, a swarm of things to coordinate their physical behavior with one another, it's not clear to me that it gives them enough um, pattern receptivity in order to do what things that we should be fearful about. Now, the thing is, I have no freaking idea. So it could be the case that, yeah, you give the machine some sensations in a similar enough way to how we sense things and it gets all of them, but it might not.
Yeah, I mean that's where we get again into strange things, but this is where I get the urge to like stop thinking about far and just go out and see if there's any new papers I can read, because stuff is happening as we speak right now.
Yeah.
I'm you know deeply unprepared. I don't feel like I'm talking to you as an expert. I'm talking to you about somebody who's got a lot of patches of knowledge that
Yeah.
I'm, quickly trying to bridge, fully aware that there's gaps all over the place, right? I'm doing, I'm talking to you, and we've had other conversations with other friends of ours, et cetera, and other people on the internet, because I'm just scrambling to
Yeah.
develop a model for the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And what I want to try to do with my own skill set is to be able to try to come up with the concepts that we need to figure out. What are the questions that we need answered? Well, one of the questions is uh, how do we, how many patterns have we actually encoded in our language? We
Yep.
can figure that one out. Well, then we can try to envision the future. If we say, a lot of patterns, maybe we're in trouble, or it'd be a very different world if we've encoded a ton of patterns that we didn't even realize we were doing into our language. It could be a very different world than if there's a harder limitation there. So I don't know the answer, but I know that one needs to be sorted out.
We'll find out. Maybe it ends up the answer ends up being that most languages don't imprint that much, but Navajo specifically was incredible. And
So
it's like
I love
one
that.
language in
So
some
isn't this
island
an
of
interesting
Polynesia.
idea? When you imagine more advanced creatures communicating with one another, maybe you could make a proxy. You could say, okay, well, these people literally have encoded more complex patterns in their language, and so that means don't feed their conversations into the machine.
Right. Okay. All right. Oh, amazing talking as always. I think this one might be useful for other people. I
Definitely.
suspect. I don't know, but hopefully, let's see how you put it together. Maybe it'll be something to point people at, because I think the world is lacking for on ramps to these ideas.
Yeah, we definitely need more of this. This has been great. I appreciate your time, Alex.
Anytime.